There is so many problems. There's thousands of toxins in our everyday life that we can be aware of and are likely unaware of in a lot of places. And I think for a lot of the things, it really comes down to finding the floor. What's the base of what we need to make sure that we're focusing on? Healthy foods and clean water, all that kind of stuff. What's the floor that people need to start prioritizing?
Yeah, I'm a realist. I'm sitting here with colored hair. My kids played lacrosse for 6 days straight on, synthetic turf with tire crumb and benzene and formaldehyde aerating off and lead and whatever. I'm a realist, and that's had to been the case because I have kids and I work and I'm busy and I don't always have the time to do some of the things I would like to do. Um, so when I approached this topic, I really wanted people to think, like, really, where should people start if they've never even heard that, like, chemicals can be harmful, that they're not tested for safety or toxicity before they go into all of these products in the US market. What would I tell people in what I do from way back at 15 years ago when I got started and my mind was blown by so much? And so I kind of built a paradigm around the 4 A's, which are and I call it the 4 A's of environmental health navigation, so to speak. And I've designed even the new book into 4 sections to understand those and how to implement them. First one is assess. I mean, that's kind of common sense. Like, let's figure out what we're exposed to. What are those chemicals about? The main ones, the big ones, the ones that really get into our bodies in a big way, through food containers and choosing better on that end, through food quality and, deciding how to get away some of the pesticides and some of the processed and ultra processed foods have a huge load of these unregulated and untested and even harmful chemicals. Let's think about assess. There's a 50-question survey, very reasonable, that I would have wanted to be asked 15 years ago, and so now I'm offering up for people to do that for themselves. The second A is avoid or swap. It's really avoid in the book, but I want people to understand that it extends to swap. So you can avoid lots of products that we've been marketed to, whether that's 20 different cleaning products for your kitchen. I mean, who needs that, Can we make our own out of 3 simple ingredients, or can we have resources like EWG.org or Clearya or Yucca or Think Dirty to really jump on and make better choices if you don't have time to make do-it-yourself recipes? And so you can either lower that number or swap those chemicals that you do like. The third A is add. And that's where anthropology and evolution comes into this picture, which I learned early on and really has, I think, informed every aspect of my medical training and practice, is that we didn't just land here. We've been here for millions of years, and our bodies have needed certain nutrients to thrive properly, to manage cancer risk, to manage inflammation, which is incredibly intricate and exquisite, our system for the immune system, even hormone function. So adding in things like nutrition and sweat from a natural way, from exercise or sauna, adding in certain foods that help, like cruciferous vegetables that upregulate the liver's ability to detox naturally through its chemical compounds. Adding in stress management, which we now know is not typically normal evolutionarily to be at this level all the time, and working in that direction to help the gut microbiome process better, because of stress affects the gut so in such a direct and indirect way. Adding in these pieces is different from necessarily taking away the chemicals. We need both. That's where we get the most optimal outcomes in terms of health. And then the fourth A out of the 4 A's, finally, is allow.
Yeah.
And allow to me is not only allowing your body and your mindset to change over time, that you can change your opinion and behaviors and activities in a reasonable way, but also allowing for life, which is birthday cake with crazy colored icing and not freaking out about it, or colored hair, which I choose to do, and I'm probably going to continue for a little while, but I'm trying to be cautious and space things out and think about it. But life is life, and it's fluid, and quality of life matters. And you can't walk around stressed that everything you do is going to make you implode. It's about allowing these big ticket items and travel, and who knows if you can reach your favorite food, or you have water that's not in plastic bottles. That's the allow that allows people to do 80-20 for the rest of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, when I heard that, the last one, I was really, really glad that you're a realist in that way, because a lot of it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I remember when I first read Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, who I've also had on the podcast, diving into like how much our just beliefs can impact our biology and impact the way that we react to certain even toxins in certain ways. But I want to start with the first one, because I think this is a really big question that I think a lot of people need to start asking is, what are the right questions we need to be asking? I think like a big reason that most people go in and not able to figure out why they feel the way that they do, or they feel worse in certain ways, is because they don't have the right questions to ask. They don't even know where to start.
That is a great question. And that's the thing. When you don't feel well, you are judging whether you're a hypochondriac, you're
Hmm.
judging why I don't have a family history of these symptoms, why no one else feels this bad. When you go sometimes to healthcare practitioners, they're all varied in their training and their
Right.
history. You might get, really shut down because your labs look great.
Hmm.
I'm a rheumatologist 22 years now. And so I deal with the immune system, and I deal with a lot of things that are, very Western. I use all the medications. Thank God we have them. I don't always use them reflexively because I'm, implementing a lot of what I talk about in the book, which reduces inflammation and manages a lot of health conditions just by making some of these connections and understanding how they affect our health. But yeah, the questions I think are really hard. And so, when you're telling patients, at least in my experience, that their labs are normal, but you're validating that they don't feel well, I think
Right.
that's so critically important in the healthcare field, especially because we have so many, kind of gray zone immune conditions. When we made Western medicine, when we kind of like built on Western medicine over hundreds of years, right? They were a set of diseases that we never thought would change, right? It's very hard to add a disease in. For example, long haul COVID. I can't even tell you how many patients had this issue and were fighting the system before it became a standard condition that
Hmm.
people were aware of 2 or 3 years later. But we all in practice saw a lot of this, but didn't validate it, didn't give it a name. And I think people have to understand that we're not done necessarily diagnosing. What we have to do is support people and validate that they may not feel well, even if the testing has not developed or there's not hard and fast evidence of disease and they fit all the criteria. And that's the part where I think people are most frustrated is they're not really hearing that. They're hearing that it's either black or white. You either have a disease or you don't. And also, we're limited in the tools in Western medicine from training, even now, to offer up the right evidence based nutrition information or the right supplement information, which, of course, I'm trying to fill that gap with the book in a very reasonable, practical way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel very alone, and also kind of together because other people can resonate, but
Yeah.
very alone in the sense of they go to the doctor, they don't know what's wrong. The doctor doesn't really give them an idea of what's wrong because the doctor, like you said, the labs are right. So where do I point them? What do I give them the direction? But I mean, a lot of people are dealing with autoimmune diseases, seems like more than ever now. Is there a direct link? Like where is it coming from? Why is it rising? And what's the solution?
So, having done this work 22 years from Western training, then getting integrative medicine training and kind of getting, the basics on environmental health and how environment, air quality, water quality, food quality, cosmetics, personal care, even feminine care products that get absorbed quite readily. Having kind of worked through that for so many years, I really didn't pay attention to the epidemiology in terms of sort of how much is rising around the world in terms of immune and autoimmune, which is self directed immune system effects around the world. But as you move through 22 years of practice, I've started to see this not only in my own practice, younger people having Hashimoto's and autoimmune issues, young women who eventually develop hypothyroidism from Hashimoto's as one outcome. Cancers that are environmentally related in terms of breast cancer. We now can safely say that it's about 90% of breast cancer new cases are actually identified as related to environment, and only about 10% are, really connected to, at least at this stage with our testing, BRCA genes and genetic abnormalities. So, you know, we've now started to get so much more information on how environment, air quality affects the immune system, also with brain health and dementia and asthma, and all of these things are we have so much robust data. When I looked at the data as I was, seeing this in my practice on a weekly basis, it turns out that between 7 and 14% of the world's population, of the US population has at least one autoimmune disease. It might be 5 to 14%. It's very hard to tell because, again, we have these gray zone cases. But the idea is that we have a growing number of new onset autoimmune diseases that are not only I should say, identified, but also through the Western, traditional estimates. And 1% of the world's population has rheumatoid arthritis now. And we can also see that, having seen all these new drugs like biologics that have really changed the face of a lot of these diseases. There was a time a couple of years ago that adalimumab, one of the biologics, was the number one drug used around the world. And it's for autoimmune diseases primarily. So the idea that the problem is reflected in a lot of the pharmaceutical solutions, I say solutions because that's limited, really shows you what's going on. Now, the connections to these chemicals I identify in not just this new book, Detoxify, but the second book, Non-Toxic, which was written with my co-author, who's an emeritus professor in endocrine disrupting chemical research, and in the textbook prior to that with Oxford University Press that has 26 of the world's leading researchers on food chemicals, water, cosmetics, medication, you name it. So all of this has been well validated through thousands of references that we now have collected around the world, connecting the dots between these chemicals, many of them, and I go through each class as much as I can, and how they are not only affecting health effects, not in just animal studies in controlled environments where you can control for lifestyle, but also epidemiologically in terms of populations of humans, and also occupationally, which is also another way of collecting this data and connections. So we really do have a lot more information than we've ever had to identify those connections between environmental exposures and human health outcomes.
The environmental exposures is something that I think for a lot of people, again, all of this stuff it can feel so overwhelming. And that's why I wanted to do on the podcast, because we can start with, like, great example. Food is something that I eat one ingredient foods about 99% of the time. I get all of my fruit frozen. Same thing with all the other things. Like, I do everything that I can to the best of even my coffee's organic. Like, I go out of my way to make sure all the things are right. But when in life, right, we think of the air quality, or we think of water quality. Water quality, of course, there's very attainable forms of making it better. But air quality, for example, like, if you live in certain areas, there's really only so much that you can do. What do you think are, let's say, the top 3 to 5 things that we need to be focusing on, let's say, outside of food, because those are the environmental factors more so?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So when I think about high volume loads into the body, that's where I start, because
Right.
it makes most sense to people that I've run this by, and it resonates, right? We think of dose makes the poison, which is the traditional toxicologic, a paradigm of how exposures happen. That doesn't fall into the same category as some of these chemicals that work at very low levels. So people should understand that difference. But in general, when we're talking about loads into the body, you can really wrap your head around food packaging. So food packaging is separate from food itself. And so when you have canned foods, for instance, you have an epoxy lining around and inside every single can, whether it's an organic can food or it's a diet soda or anything you can think of in terms of cans. The 99.99% of those packages are lined with BPA that gets into our body and has hormone effects, estrogenic effects, and immune system effects. So that's a big load just by looking at the container that you're getting. So I love frozen organics and frozen foods in general because they not only lock in nutrition, but also, even though there's a black plastic bag, you're not microwaving in them, hopefully. You're putting them in glass and stainless steel. So yes, packaging is something people don't think about. I have a food pyramid with that as being one of the bottom portions of the pyramid to bring that into the conversation. Water, no doubt. We drink water our whole lives. Our bodies are made up of water, 85% really. And so it really concerned me when I understood about the Safe Drinking Water Act from 1974 that still holds 91 chemicals accountable at all of these wastewater treatment plants that service 85% of the US population. And yet The infrastructure hasn't changed, even though we have thousands of new chemicals added into the water system that get in through lakes and streams and even sewage, believe it or not. We still haven't changed the infrastructure of the wastewater treatment plants. And we even add chemicals intentionally for good reason. Historically, we want to add chlorine and some of these chemicals to kill off, viruses and bacteria that can affect populations to the water system. But we also, add in detergents and a lot of chemicals that will never come off unless you take them off when they hit your home. And
Mhm.
that's where water filtration is so key. And I talk about that in quite, detail. The idea is that those loads between food packaging, water, even our skin is very absorptive. So once you change out your, lotions and maybe your body sprays, I have 2 teenage boys, they use tons of product just like
Mhm.
women do and young girls. The idea is that we want to make better choices if you're going to use those products, which is fine. I mean, I don't want my kids to stink. I mean, I don't want to stink. So the idea is that we want to just make better, safer choices, whether we make our own, which obviously I do a lot of do it yourself in the book with, even deodorant,
Mhm.
or you just have the right resources to choose and they choose their own with their own apps. So this has become something I do with high school students and others. So the idea is load is a really big deal. Reducing those loads in ways that feel comfortable. It's a journey over time, but it makes actually life cheaper in terms of products. It makes life easier because you just kind of can order your stuff. You've already vetted it out. Its level of toxicity from people who do this very well. And it kind of keeps you moving to the next direction. So yeah, it's an overwhelming topic. It's certainly addressed that way in the book in order to kind of walk your way through it. There's lots of, self-deprecating stories that I fill it with, which are true. And, the process of even the other day, believe it or not, I got rid of one of my blenders that's I've been using for 12 years or 10 years, which is all plastic. And I don't
Right.
cook that much. My husband does a lot more, but the idea is that I literally switched to a glass blender and it has changed everything. Now I'm blending up a storm and having a good time because I think subconsciously I just never wanted to touch the blender because I knew that it could potentially have more microplastics in the foods and, it's old and it's scratched up. So I think we're all in a path and we just have to decide what fits, what feels right, and not, have regrets or, shame over any of it. It's the process for all of us.
Yeah, I think when you become aware, it's very hard to not have shame around certain things, right? Like from the packaging of food or having fluoride in your toothpaste or like whatever the case may be, it can get again overwhelming in because there's so many things. Once you get aware, you start eating foods that have a mom and dad or they come from a tree or they come from the ground, and then you start thinking about the water that you drink, and then you start thinking about, like you said, the deodorant that you have, does it have fragrance in it? I no longer use candles. Like making sure there's just you find one thing that's wrong, and then there's another thing, and then there's another thing, and then there's another thing, and it just kind of piles on top of another, and it can become very stressful to feel like everything is toxic nowadays, is it not?
Well, if we reframe it, which I've had to kind of think this through, like I said, with different populations and eighth graders versus medical
Right.
doctors, when you reframe it to being like, you know what, instead of being the victim of
Yeah.
this horrible system, I will say it's a horrible
Very.
system when you dig deep, right? If you're the victim, you feel helpless. It actually causes you to be, less resilient and you're kind of like, it's like, learned helplessness,
Mhm.
psych 101, right?
Yep.
But when you gamify it, and I've now turned it into gamifying
Mhm.
because I used to be on the ledge. I mean, what you're describing is what most people are like, what? What am I going to do? Everything's toxic. Even my glasses are plastic on my nose and I'm holding my iPhone with plastic. You have to start to think like this is not a race.
Yeah.
And if you gamify it where you're in control, you sort of can find these wins. Like I'm all excited about my blender. I mean, who
Yeah.
knew? And now I'm looking at all these really fun recipes with organic cottage cheese and, like it's just I think it's a matter of deciding when you're ready. And that one win has been very fulfilling for the last, 72 hours. Who knows what my next win will be, but it's a process. And I just think in terms of shame and regret, there's a lot of people with kids that have disabilities. There's a lot of people who are managing chronic illness like breast cancer, people in remission, people who are managing chronic abdominal issues like Crohn's. There's a lot of stuff that people are managing. And I don't ever, and this is the problem with the health and wellness world, not that it's perfect at all. It's that, we have to figure out what to take from Western medicine, and we have to think about what we want from health and wellness world, which has gotten a little crazy as well. The testing that I think is going on in the health and wellness world because people are desperate, to me, is something I find problematic. And the Western world only pushing pharmaceuticals, I think, is problematic. And I think we have to figure out where we fit in the middle, using science, using research, but also understanding that we have ancient healing practices that have been around, like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and food is medicine concept, integrative medicine, where I was trained with Dr. Weil, really focus on food quality, water, sleep, rest, exercise, movement. Those are the things I want people to think about instead of spending money on testing. Either it's for water or for your body. Put that testing money into the solutions, like buying a reverse osmosis water filter or loading up on USDA organic frozen foods, because even fresh supermarket organic
Right.
has less
A bunch of
nutrient
it.
value. So there's a lot. Massage, cognitive therapy if you have mental health issues, the right supplements that are really high quality, or don't take them. I mean, those are the things I want people to spend their money on instead of the testing and the fear.
I know that each person is different, but are there supplements that you look for that you think everyone should be taking? You hear magnesium, you hear zinc, you hear all these ones, but are there any that you look to that people need to be taking, you think?
Yeah, I look at human beings as a species that has really lost their nutritional value. And really, it's a combination of not just busy lifestyle and getting in whatever, 6, 7 vegetables a day, whatever you were told to get those nutrients, but also because the food system that most of us rely on is so limited in terms of maintaining that nutrient value through travel,
Yeah.
through soil quality in terms of nutrient value, how long things stay in a low temperature refrigeration before it goes to the store. It could be up to 6 months. I mean, believe it. And
Yeah.
so the idea that we are having such nutrient rich foods, even if they're all Mediterranean and plant based and whole foods and maybe even organic,
Mhm.
that's the discrepancy that I've noticed. And what we're seeing is that people are deficient in vitamin D. That's the most common, right? People go, oh my God, my D's so low. I've never had a patient who was not low in terms of the scale of normal 30 to 100 at most labs. I'm pushing people to consider and why they should have that D level of their blood up in the 60 to 80 range when the normal is 30 to 100. I want people to think D is really important to the immune system, to heart disease prevention, to muscle function. I want people, that's one of the nutrients that I would say is quite well known socially and, even in the medical world. But also magnesium, you can get that from food. I think that's always the best way to try to get magnesium, but certainly we're deficient in that in many ways. That's why we have a lot of migraines and hypertension. Magnesium helps move those vessels to be more vascular. So
Mm.
magnesium is a very interesting, I mean, the right one, there's multiple, and one makes you go to the
Yeah.
bathroom, a bunch of them, and some don't. So you want to think about, the ones that are least harsh on the belly, like citrate and glycinate. But so D, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, I talk a lot about in the book, not just eating fish, which we know can have lots of contaminants like PCBs and mercury, methylmercury, but and certainly in bigger fish versus smaller, which I talk about in terms of bioaccumulation of those levels. But omegas are really the point. We're not getting enough, and the quality really truly matters when you're choosing omega-3 fish oil in terms of how they distill it and how much DHA, EPA is in there. I also talk about a multivitamin for every human, just a really solid multi that's a great company, no colors, preservatives, additives, that has 150 micrograms of iodine, which people don't think about, but is very
Mhm.
protective to the thyroid gland and implicated in a lot of these thyroid conditions that we're now seeing. So, from a nutrient perspective, we have these solutions to some degree that we should be thinking about from birth till death as a human species in a way that's safe, affordable, clean, and well vetted. And so those are some of the things that I think are just kind of like red line humans should be on variable doses. Are there risks to some of those nuances? Yeah, multivitamin with iron you wouldn't want to give to a menopausal or premenopausal woman unless you knew her iron levels. Or if she's deficient, you want to be thoughtful about iron. If you don't want calcium with men in their multivitamins, because that has been shown to increase risk for calcification of the heart vessels, even in women too. But
Mm.
calcium you leave out. Magnesium you want not in a multi, because that has a lot to do with how the kidneys work. So people with chronic kidney disease might not be able to get rid of that magnesium. But if you take those three things out, you have a solid multi. That's your flooring for life. And then everything else can be add-ons for depending on what you're testing. So reasonable, nothing outrageous, but we're a plant. So this is what I call human fertilizer.
Hmm.
And we should be putting into our body as a plant clean air, clean water, sunlight, when it's reasonable, supplements, healthy food, fiber. Those are the things that have made the body, human body, work for millions of years in a really optimal way.
Yeah, I think the thought on it being well vetted is so important, because you can look at electrolytes that have red 40 and blue 1 and all these other things in it. It's like, you think it's fine. This is hydrating me. And then you actually look at the back of it and you're like, it's insane. It's crazy what is determined as healthy nowadays. Even eggs, just going to the store bought versus, buying pasture raised. Or I lived in Hawaii for a few months last year, and I was buying $12 cartons down the road, which is great, but for a lot of people that they're not able to do that. Or you're getting sourdough bread right down the street. I mean, a lot of these things are very pricey in a lot of ways for a lot of people, that just doesn't seem possible or sustainable even.
Yeah, and I agree with you on all of that. And when I'm conscious of who I speak to, which groups I speak to, what socioeconomic backgrounds my patients have every different kind of occupation you can think of. So no one is really, especially in this economy, we're all worried about finances. But what I always think about is what is the highest yield bang for your buck, right? If you're going to spend money on water bottles, which can be like, $3, $4, $5, depending on where you're buying them, when you can bring your water from home, getting an RO water system underneath your kitchen sink for $275 to buy it,
Yep.
$150 for a plumber to put it in. There you go, $400, $450 up front. And now you're cooking with that water. You're traveling with this. I take my water to dinner. I fill up at home. We take, to sports tournaments, a 3-gallon container. So to me, that, first of all, it's far cheaper than even the drop-in pitcher filters, which are carbon block, tend to be less effective in general for removing contaminants. And also they cost a lot of money to get those replacements, or refrigerator doors, that kind of thing. So when I'm thinking and writing and sharing, I'm kind of always conscious of that in terms of what are the highest yield bangs for your buck. Frozen organic food, in every store across the country, any big box store, we have ShopRite, and there's Wegmans, and there's Stop and Shop. I mean, there's a lot of big box stores that actually have figured out that making and creating their own organic frozen foods, and organic matters, just in case
Mhm.
your audience is not aware, USDA organic is the only regulation that has any teeth in the US food system. So that's a really important statement. Thousands of pesticide, fertilizer, chemicals can't be used in those produce and products. Colors, additives, preservatives, genetically modified ingredients cannot be used. The soil quality has to be entirely different than conventional farming. And so when I say frozen organics, it actually democratizes human health in this country, in my opinion, because the price point is so much lower than people would expect, certainly lower than fresh supermarket
Yeah.
organic foods. And they're much more accessible, and they're much more practical because they don't go bad.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of reasons and ways to, as you said, kind of lower the price point for human health. And I think that that's kind of what I post to on the Smart Human, my podcast and my social media. I'm trying to get people not only to think about doing it right, but doing it right in a really reasonable, cost-effective way.
Yeah. One thing that I think is really fascinating about this is, it's been probably 50 years since like the autoimmune diseases have like kind of taken more of a rise in some way, at least like from society's standpoint. And you think of, or the way that I think of it is like fluoride in water or toothpaste, like stuff like that has been around for what feels like forever. And now all of a sudden it feels to be a problem, right? So why do you think all of a sudden it's becoming more obvious of all of these problems that you talk about?
I will tell you, hands down, people are getting sicker. younger, and with no family history. And we're seeing cancers for young people before there's even screening
Mhm.
mechanisms, say breast cancer and mammograms. That's not even until 40. And we're seeing lots of young people, younger women, certainly getting identified. If that colon cancer has been an uptick, and that certainly has a lot to do with the gut microbiome and the health of the gut. Um, Even related even to processed and ultra processed foods, alcohol, sedentary lifestyle. There's also other lifestyle factors, smoking. But, listen, people often say, oh, people are learning about autoimmune diseases. It's become such a fad. And, we're just getting better at diagnosing it, similar to some of these other arguments for even autism and those kind of things. And I say, listen, if you tell me a conventional doctor has more than 15 minutes to discuss your history and your body and your symptoms, then I would like to know who that doctor is, unless they're
Right.
cash based, because the conventional system does not embrace that understanding of what people are eating and drinking and sleeping and stress management and occupational exposures. Who asks what you do for a living and what you're exposed to, maybe 8 hours a day?
Mhm.
Fumes, or paints or solvents, or working as a plumber, working as a carpenter, working in schools with lots of chemicals for art class. So I think the idea that we are getting sicker is a real one. And I think it's, as with most things that we've discovered with breast cancer and some of these other components of lifestyle, heart disease
Mhm.
and stroke and MI risk, a lot of it's coming from what we eat, what we drink, and our lifestyle, for sure. And that includes, again, sedentary lifestyle, lack of movement, stress levels. Medications can contribute to many side effect issues. So I would say that it's not about detection. It's more about understanding that almost everyone has something that makes them ill at a younger age now. And it's forcing them to search the internet and find people who will listen. And really, you have to decide who your messenger is, really, what I've seen.
Yeah, and there's so many messengers out there. There's social media is so amazing and so tricky at the same time. It's very difficult to understand who we should be listening to, because everyone has a degree at this point at something, or has someone supporting them, and it's very difficult to know who to listen to.
Yeah, and to navigate that is not easy. I mean, I feel like I agree with a certain group of people that I think are trained in, say, integrative medicine. I think functional medicine has the right tenets, but it's also open to more training of people who are not physicians.
Yeah.
So it opens up a little bit more, not such a bad thing, right? Because we need more healthcare providers that are well trained, no matter what, whether you're a midwife or nurse practitioner or PA or whatever,
Mhm.
or nursing. But the idea is that as you get pulled away from sort of the conventional Western physician training, it also leaves interpretation from other fields that may confound issues. And so I'm always conscious of kind of what people's training is. And I do a lot of podcasts, as you know, and I don't always agree with everything that podcaster is known for, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's hard. You have to decide where you want to share your message, because you're then identified with the thinking of that person who's interviewing you.
Yeah.
So I have to be conscious of that. That being said, the messaging I'm giving is really so important. It's so critical that if you need to be on a podcast that's shouting to millions more people, and you stay in your lane and you keep to the science, to me that's an avenue for improvement of the population, and less likely to kind of block me out of certain populations that think that connection is a problem. So you have to be judicious. But the idea is that it's hard to get this material. In fact, in 15 years, I will say this: I've written 2 other books.
Mhm.
I have friends who have, colleagues who are very, well entrenched into the research, who have written some of these books on environmental toxins. Hasn't gotten the play, I don't think, until this moment. It's gotten the most play. I'm getting it the furthest that I think I've ever gotten my information. And I think that's, again, because I think people are ready for it. I think we're starting to see so much illness. And I hope it continues, not only to help people do this for themselves, but affect regulation. I don't see that happening, given what I'm seeing in terms of the lack of NIH studies that are going to continue, departments of environmental health that have been closed down. Even inspectors for the food system have been removed. So we're now going to have even infectious etiologies in our food system, unfortunately. And with global changes, in terms of climate change, the heat is also going to affect those risks. So we have a lot ahead of us that we have to sort of wrap our heads around and really think about who are the scientists that are really going to support the studies that move policy.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the regardless of where you're going. I mean, people are going to resonate with you who are going to resonate with you, and people who aren't going to resonate with you aren't going to resonate with you. But getting it out there is more important than anything. I think
Yeah.
more than ever, it makes sense that people are getting to you and the message is going out there, because I think biohacking is like bigger than it's ever been right now. People spend millions of dollars on their body, people that can do it, and it's a really big thing. And so I think that thinking about the toxins that are in our everyday life, like you said, I mean, social media has made us more aware than ever, and it's really hard to just deny when we're aware of it, and it's hard to just let it go by. At least for me, that's for sure. But I think a lot of
No, I love that you're noticing all this. And listen, the biohackers, when I think of biohackers, I don't always think of people who are conscious of chemicals.
yeah,
I think they're thinking about living longer, but they're not always pulling in the conversation of whether their protein powder has colors and preservatives and
yeah,
additives,
yes,
and contaminants like lead and a lot of heavy metals that we now know are in these protein powders. We don't think about, the tanning oils. We don't think about, necessarily, maybe Botox and filler. And I'm not judging. I'm just saying that just because you're a biohacker doesn't always mean that your goals are the same,
hmm,
and consistent with the same message that I'm giving about chemicals, right? I
absolutely.
have colored hair. So again, there's hypocrisy in a little bit of every section of this conversation. We have to decide what feels right to us. And I think the biohacker community is really impressive and interesting because they're also leading the way in a lot of areas that I wouldn't necessarily dive into.
Hmm,
But I'm looking at the middle and the lower echelon. I say this meaning like people who are just working 5 jobs and don't have time to go to yoga class every day, or are not doing 6 HIIT classes, on Peloton. Or I'm really kind of trying to get to the real middle ground and lower ground of people who could really make these choices in a very simple way without having to invest so much time that they don't have or money they don't have.
right.
And so you just have to decide what population. I've gone where the love is. The love to me is not necessarily the medical institutions who don't want this information, which we could go into at another time. It's
Hmm,
not necessarily the biohacker world, although they're very interested, of course, because they're very self-aware. But it's really the communities and people that I think are buying the cheapest, most processed foods that have water contamination, and then local communities are giving them bottled water. My feeling is give these folks dignity, or any area that's been affected, rich or poor, give them a reverse osmosis water filter for $275. Let them make their own water and not have to move and not have to take handouts of plastic bottles. There's so many better ways to do, I think, health in a way that's cost conscious and also allows for dignity and availability and accessibility than people ever thought. So yeah, it just depends on where you're going to reach. I want to get into schools. I want to reach this, anyone who wants this information. Teenagers love this material, and
Bingo.
they're the perfect demographic. So we really should, I think, focus next on the love of young people who really want to have less health outcomes like their parents or grandparents, to be honest with you, in terms of, overall wellness.
100%. And I think you're right when it comes to, I think of people that are biohackers are proactive, but I think the people that like really appreciate what you do are very detail oriented, and like are very intentional about the way that they go about things. You're bringing your drink to restaurants or whatever it may be. Like, you're going out of your way. People look at me like I'm insane when I bring certain things or I don't eat certain things. Like, I haven't ate fast food in probably 5 years. I don't know how long. I couldn't tell you the last time. But I think when you get in the habit of doing these things, it then becomes not only the lifestyle that you live, but it's preferred. Like, I would choose a lot of the time to make my own food at home, eating my pound of ground beef rather than going out somewhere. And I feel a lot better when I make it, knowing that I know what's in it, rather than going out and I don't know what they're making it with. They're probably putting a lot of different sprays and butters and all these different kind of things that I necessarily don't need. So I think you have to go out of your way. And once you make it a priority, it can just become your lifestyle. And more than anything, you go out of your way to make it a priority. But you say teenagers are liking it. It's surprising, because I think I'm different than a lot of people my age, where I'm very health focused and long term focused, but I don't think a lot of people are in that same path as me though. So I'm curious why you find that.
Well, I actually did the research on this. So, I was at one point about 10 years ago, I was running around to all these different hospital systems, working with environmental working group who educated me on a lot about how how the hormone effects from
Mm,
chemicals. I was learning from a consumer advocacy group that had done a lot of great work because I wasn't getting this from anywhere else.
right.
And I went to all these different, I mean, probably 25 different grand rounds. I gave lectures, a lecture on this from an evidence based research, high level way. And I got no real feedback. I mean, no one really wanted to switch out their plastics in the NICUs and the pediatric intensive care units where there's a big load of those chemicals and they could just switch out the brand and switch out the plasticizers. And then my teenager babysitter at the time was like, oh my God. And she was walking out and she said, oh my God, I wonder if my shampoo's killing me. And she's like, I can't believe what you do. And it was kind of an off the cuff remark. And I thought myself, my gosh, like she was so interested. So I started to do pilot projects at Princeton High School in the area. So I grew up in this area, Princeton. And they allowed me in to do two different pilot projects, one in 2014 and one in like 2017 or 18. And I collected data pre and post, seeing if they're interested, seeing what they were. I gave lectures on air quality was one week, water quality was another, personal care products. It resonated. And I made it into a TEDx talk. So it's available on YouTube if you type my name. But the idea is it was just something that I was very surprised by. And I just went where I thought the love would be.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it's resonated. So it's been keeping me moving forward because if you don't find the community that listens to your message or wants to hear you, you can find someone who will, a group. And now doctors are listening. I now teach environmental health to 3 physician training programs in integrative medicine. I never expected that. I mean, I don't even know what tomorrow will bring. But the idea is that I'm teaching pharmacists. I have an online courses for environmental medicine that people can reach through the Smart Human Academy or the smarthuman.com is where it's at. So the idea is that it's starting to pick up. I never expected it. But teenagers, very self-aware, very self-conscious at a really critical point in their learning where they can make changes for the rest of their lives, assuming, they, make changes now or start to think about water and personal care. They use the most personal care products in a 24-hour period than any other demographic. And many of the chemicals in those personal care products have hormone and immune system effects. We now know this. So, and I talk about much more detailed in the book, but the idea is we need to, at least get this information if they want it to this population because they're going to make changes their whole life and they know how to use tech. They know how to look up apps. I mean, my kids have to do it before they buy products and it's worked out great. So, why not?
Yeah, I think it does make sense when you put it in that perspective, because I think for a lot of people that are later in their life are already in the sunken cost fallacy. If I'm already this far, I mean, why start caring now? Because if I'm impacted, then it's already impacted me to the level that I really probably can't do anything about it. I mean, you've been in rheumatology for 20 plus years, integrative medicine, like all that kind of stuff that you were talking about. What did you believe at the beginning of your journey that you no longer believe in?
Oh gosh, boy, do you have 4 hours, 10 hours? I don't know. I mean, I think at the beginning of the journey, I was so much more in tuned with fixing the problem. I was so stressed about, first of all, in the beginning, I actually was so angry at the healthcare system because I hadn't been taught this material when so much robust data exists.
Right.
I was angry that I'd gone through not just pre-med in college, never hearing this, high school, but also med school residency and fellowship training. And I was seeing patients and had no clue that plastics have effect on the immune system when I'm treating autoimmune patients, for instance. So I was kind of disheartened by the fact that that was my lead up. I was
Yeah.
upset that I had to spend 15 years writing 3 books and shouting on mountaintops to show these connections. And finally it's resonating. So I feel like I'm trying to do the work that no one else has to. But now it's come full circle where there are a lot of people in training programs that do want this material. And so that's really been the biggest change is watching the market. I've been through 3 presidents, 3, HHS leaders. I've been through every kind of policy that made it to the table, to president sign, to taking off the table, reversals of regulation to implement. I've seen it all. And now I realize that it's still the message of doing it yourself. So A lot of it's changed, and I think for the better. I wish the regulation would tighten up. I wish we would really think about that at sort of upstream material creation,
Mm.
regulation. That's really, we want to do it like Europe. We want to do it like other areas that do this. You know what I mean?
You'd think that we'd get to a point where it's prioritized. I mean, it seems we have the ability, but it also feels though in United States, I think the medical system, it almost seems like they want you to be unhealthy and as sick as you possibly can be, so that you stick around and you have to pay them as long as you can. So I try to go to people that are not directly in it in a lot of ways, because a lot of those people don't really have anything. I mean, of course, everyone has something to gain, but it's frustrating the way that the medical system really is playing out in the world today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
One
mean, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was gonna ask. We talked about water, air quality, a lot of those things. I think of candles, of deodorant, of clothes, of like not having fragrances in things that I put on my body. Like we think of, I think when a lot of people think of health, they think of what they're putting in their body, but they're not really thinking of what's being exposed to their body or what they're putting on their bodies. Like I said, clothes, deodorant, stuff like that. What are the top 5 things that you can think of that we should be prioritizing to maybe swap?
Yeah, so water, food. Now, I think feminine care products are really not mentioned a lot to people, and especially because women use tampons and feminine care products throughout their lifetime, and that's a
Yeah.
very absorptive area of the body is the vaginal canal. I think people should be thinking about changing out tampons to ones without plastic applicators that don't have chlorine and antimicrobial chemicals. It's just something we can even measure those levels in the blood with medication, so we know we can do that with chemicals. So I think that's something people should be thinking about. In terms of clothing, I would really urge people to consider the materials that they purchase. 100% cotton, I think, is really important these days, because not that, our polyester, sweatshirts and, all the soft materials that are super cheap and even recycled now, they're going to make their way into the water system anyway, because that's how washing machines work. And those microplastics from polyesters, really do have a big global effect. Not that necessarily, I want to scare everyone into throwing away all their clothes, but it's about what you purchase next. It's a journey. Thinking about materials just makes sense. And cotton is also won't be absorbed into the skin. You want to wash your clothes, certainly when you buy new clothes, and you want to sort of reduce your dry cleaning in terms of the chemicals that are put on dry cleaning. Choosing the right fabrics will allow you to make those choices, actually, so you don't need dry cleaning. Workout clothes is really interesting. I mean, I've had the same workout clothes for 10 years, which is probably gross. But the idea is that I think that at a certain point, the perfluoroalkyls and some of those chemicals that have been identified will wash out at a certain point. You've outwashed them. But that being said, there's still a plastic material of sorts. They're stretchable. So, there are better ways to do a lot, but you really want to be thinking about reusing your clothes. You're, looking at toys that are, handed down through generations that are plastic, often have some of the worst plasticizer chemicals. So the newer ones after 2006, really in the US, if they're made in the US, don't have those chemicals, but certainly overseas, 99-cent stores have a lot of chemicals that are unregulated, and kids chew on these. So, there's little things that you flip out. There's, you don't have to flip out about, I have a cell phone that has a plastic case. I have, glasses that sit on my nose that are plastic. I color my hair. You have to be reasonable because you can't always function. You can change to metal, but you still have the plastic thing. So it's not something you want to, go nuts over. But certainly air quality candles, as you said, that's an easy win. Air plugins, incense, candles that aren't vetted, right out the door. Really important. And you can get alternatives that are really safe. Plants clean the air. Windows, if you're in a good place without pollution. Lots of really simple hacks that you can clean your air, get air filters that are reasonable now. HVAC systems, vacuums that don't recirculate, just, good HEPA filter. So lots of things we can do that lower cost, keep us healthy, keep our bodies clean, change the destiny of our health, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. This conversation, we could talk forever because all this stuff is like it's endless. But there's one
And
last one
Yeah.
last question I ask every guest, because a lot of this stuff is like unlearning a lot of the things that we thought were true about the health system, and in choosing to take on different beliefs. And my question to
Yeah.
you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief am I unlearning? Unlearning that the system will save us and that regulation is going to happen in any speed other than snail's pace for human health in terms of our overall wellness and lifetimes. And I'm unlearning to rely on anyone else to do it for us, and that we really can do this on our own if we have the right information, the right knowledge from the right people. We don't use fear. We don't get sucked into products that we think we need to look prettier, to younger. We really start to think about big picture um, stuff and don't work on impulse, work on information that's vetted. So yeah, I mean, that's what I've kind of learned and I'm continuing to learn, but I'm hopeful. I mean, it's not that I'm not hopeful. I'm hopeful. I just think that we have to do it better and we have to learn from the right resources that do this information well.
Yeah, like anything, it can be someone else's fault. It's still our responsibility to make the change and go out of our way. So I'm grateful that you are. Of course, all your links and everything will be in the show notes, but is there anywhere you'd like to direct people?
So just thesmarthuman.com if you want to take some courses that are very small. If you want to, certainly check out my book. I mean, I have it here. I'll show it to you. It's called Detoxify. It really is how I've been able to, kind of scale this conversation, including people who are not feeling well, like fatigue, rheumatoid arthritis, talking about inflammation, how to really manage that. And what I've seen for 22 years, really more like 10 years of doing a lot of this together. But I will say that that's a really great resource that I have found that's resonating. And the smarthuman.com is really on social media. The Smart Human is TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and all that stuff. My own podcast where I interview researchers and physicians that I respect, that I think really have messages that don't always get out there because these are researchers. They don't spend their time doing social media and media. So if you're interested in some of the smartest people that don't, that create the headlines, but don't actually write them, then I think going to the source is really quite important. So that's it. And I'm in Princeton, New Jersey. People want to be patients, still taking patients. And I also do telemedicine for people who are not living in New Jersey. So Aly Cohen MD is my website for my practice, Aly Cohen MD.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kwan. I appreciate you immensely. Thank you for the time.
Oh, James, thank you. And it takes a village. So thank you for everything you've done to share the messages of so many people. I mean, I think it should not be unrecognized that you're helping this topic move along in such a beautiful way, especially for, I'm sure, a young population, younger than me, but certainly everyone as well. So thank you for your time and your interest.
Absolutely.